Hi everyone, this is Sergio. Making a supercar video is not a problem. We have already filmed Lamborghini, Ferrari, Audi and even McLaren for you. And today we have a guest of the man who creates these cars. It's Maxim Shkinder, our compatriot. He works as a senior designer at McLaren. Meet him. By our introduction, you realized that we invited this man to be our guest. Maxim, hi.
Hi, guys.
Let's start by introducing ourselves. Who are you and where are you from? Why are we here? I'll answer the why question. Guys, this is the pride of Ukraine. Max comes from a small town and has achieved everything on his own. He's just a gem of our country.
How beautifully you introduced me, and for free.
Yes.
In fact, I'm really one of the few automotive designers who are current professionals and work for foreign automotive brands. Actually, I have been working in the industry for about 10 years. I am not the only Ukrainian, there are not many of us, as I said, but nevertheless the guys are working.
I'd like to point out that Max is the current senior designer. Imagine that, at McLaren, England, London. We will talk about how you managed to reach this position, how you came to it and why McLaren, but first tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from?
I come from a small town Energodar, Zaporizhzhia region. In fact, at first I was fond of drawing, which, in fact, it all started with, I was not interested in cars and I am not at all, as they say, petrol head. I've never been into cars. I passed my driver's license quite late, at the age of 24, already being a car designer in one of the companies I worked for before McLaren, but more on that later.
It's a small town called Energodar, Zaporizhzhia region. Is that correct? This city is located in Zaporizhzhia Oblast, Zaporizhzhia region, Ukraine and McLaren. How did it happen?
Your question blended everything together and brought 3 decades of my life together. Because at the time, when I was at school, I didn't even know there was such a company as McLaren. It was all a gradual process, but again, it all started with my passion for drawing. It was the one thing I was good at. I did poorly in school, graduated with mediocre grades, and my prospects were quite dim. Because, like most young men my age, the choice was that you either go into the army or you go to an institution. I actually wondered then what my strengths were. It was drawing and I decided that I probably wanted to become a designer and, by the way, not an automobile designer, but an industrial designer.
What does it mean?
Industrial design, guys, is the design of everything, gadgets, various devices. It is everything that has a three-dimensional form, everything that can be touched, felt, turned over. Gradually, these three-dimensional shapes turned into cars. That's where it all started.
I say we start cutting the meat. You said you know how to cut pork, so I'll leave it to you, and I'll thread the meat on the skewers while we continue our conversation. You have completed high school. How many years have you studied? Do you have a complete or incomplete education?
I have a complete high school education, but they wanted to kick me out. By the way, I was expelled for unsatisfactory behavior in 9th grade. My parents don't like to talk about it. I guess they are partly embarrassed by this, because they gave me all the essentials I needed to develop and nurture me. But being a creative person, I guess somewhere in the back of my mind I was a rebel even then. This was expressed in the fact that I often broadcast a point of view that did not coincide with that of the majority regarding the school and teachers, so I had problems related to discipline. It was difficult for me to obey. That being said, all subjects for me, whether it was math, chemistry, or biology, were all drawing lessons. I drew, as usual, on student desks, in books, and in notebooks. And, in fact, that's how I got my reputation as someone who refused to engage in dialogue.
That is, you were unconventional for our educational system.
You can also put it this way, it's much shorter and truer.
By the way, I want to point out that all people with out-of-the-box thinking for our education system can neither exist normally nor learn normally. Therefore, they do not fit the system, and as a rule they are either considered underachievers or geniuses. In other words, there is no middle ground. Education abroad is a little different, it's more individual, but we'll talk about that later. Is this one ready yet?
Yes.
That's right. Okay. I told you not to cut in big chunks, but it turns out fine. Guys, we're going to have sausages, not kebabs.
I can't. I don't have a multitasking mode. I'm either slicing meat or answering your questions. I can't do both.
Okay.
I'm having a hard time with this.
Slice the meat and answer the questions. What happened to you next?
I began to have a cultural hunger, a deficit in cultural life. Moreover, when I moved from Energodar to Kiev, I did not know what exactly I lacked. At some point, I felt cramped.
In the city?
Yes, in the city, but not physically.
I see.
That's why I first went to the cinema only at the age of 17.
You were cramped, but not physically, obviously. In Energodar, a man weighing 75 or 80 kilograms suddenly felt cramped.
You flattered me. I think I must have weighed maybe 60 pounds back then. Anyway, I came to Kiev and immediately realized what I lacked, because there were museums, theaters, and cinemas. Nowadays, these are quite ordinary everyday things, which, probably, are now available even in Energodar.
Okay, you graduate. What happens next?
In fact, an interesting thing happens, because as soon as I get free rein and manage my time and resources, like some allotted amount of money a month, like any young student who hasn't made any money yet.
Take this.
Yeah, okay. And then you begin to realize that life cannot be paused. It is not a computer game. You don't want to go back to the past level. And one wants to live life with dignity, respectively, as you or I used to say, not to be a bystander. A lot of things happen because of the people around you. I'm sure you think so too. These are the people who, at a certain point, supported you, ignited your enthusiasm. These people were my professors and my classmates.
At university you started liking cars, you started reading magazines and the like. What happened to you next? Why do all university graduates stay in Ukraine, and many of them don't even work in their profession, but you? It won't fry properly. Why did you become so successful?
Everything is banal, because there is simply nowhere to work as a car designer in Ukraine.
And our Aptuzaz?
And who needs this Aptozaz? It stopped developing 50 years ago and remains somewhere in the past.
Did you graduate or did you not graduate?
When I graduated from university in Ukraine, I was already enrolled in an Italian institute with a specialization in automotive design, because several years in a row, before I graduated from my university in Kiev, I applied, sent my documents and portfolio to this university. 2 years in a row at least, I didn't fit certain criteria.
Why? What was the name of the university in Italy and why did you start sending documents there? Did you want to study in Italy because you realized that there would be no development in Ukraine?
In Ukraine, no one needs you with this rather narrow specialized education. Regardless of the level of your qualifications, no one is interested in you as an employee.
Please tell me it's a dead end.
It's a dead end.
Thank you. Let's move on. Guys, Italy is the birthplace of car design and home to some of the world's most beautiful things. Furniture, bathroom fixtures, tiles, cars and even fashion, right?
Yes.
Exactly, by fashion, by clothes. Let's continue. You send in your resume and you get a reply from an Italian university.
I receive an email reply from the university. We congratulate you, you have won a 100% grant. In general, they had 3 grants for training, 100, 50, and 25%.
Guys, I'll explain what a 100, 50, and 25% grant is. Let's say tuition costs $20,000 a year. Max wins a 100% grant, so the university pays 100% of his tuition. 50% means you pay $10,000 and the university pays the other $10,000. 25% means the university pays $5,000 and you pay $15,000. Max got a 100% grant, the best grant ever.
Yes, it's the first place and it's a big responsibility, because it can be taken away from you very easily. If you don't get a certain number of points during the school year, the grant can be reduced and you can be expelled.
Do you guys realize where Energodar is and where Italy is? Max was born in an average family and yet he won a 100% grant. By the way, I want to emphasize that he did not come from some rich tycoon family. He, a man from an ordinary average Ukrainian family, where they saved up money for a refrigerator, for a TV, for housing and everything else, wins a grant in Italy without finishing his studies at his university. You won a grant, right?
Yes.
You hadn't finished your university studies in Ukraine when you were invited to Italy?
Indeed, it was like that. It was a lottery and I won the jackpot with the maximum winnings. I finished my studies here, defended my diploma while I was doing the paperwork for Italy. It happened in 1 or 2 months and everything worked out perfectly. Accordingly, I flew to Italy, already being a graduate of a Ukrainian university. There I studied there for 2 years in a master's program. I think that in 2 years I gained 5 years of experience, because all the specialists, all the teachers, are current designers at Italian car brands.
Tell us a little bit about this school in Italy and which celebrities graduated from it. Is it a famous school or something like a sanatorium? What was it?
This is a private for-profit school. The school is called IED Istituto Europeo di Design, and is located in Turin, the heart of the Italian automotive industry.
What famous people went to school there?
That's how, without preparation, I can't remember the names of famous people who graduated from this school. I can say, however, that automotive design legends like Chris Bangle taught there. He is the author of the most sensational series of cars. Now I do not remember the name.
The BMW 5 Series E60.
It was the first BMW to open the entire lineup.
Yes, that's right. Kids Attack. Really, it was such a controversial car. You're the one who told me all about it. I just memorized the fact that there was a Chris Bangle who designed this car. Did he teach at your school?
Yeah, he was one of our teachers. A small addition to the previous thread. You understand, it was that resonant generation of BMW, when after the black boomer suddenly appears this sleek, with eyelashes, quite feminine image of a BMW car.
Guys, while the fire is burning and the coals are being prepared, I suggest we walk around this beautiful area where we are now. By the way, this is Ukraine, the town of Vyshgorod, not far from Kiev, and at the same time let's ask Max about how he lived in Italy. When you found yourself in Italy, what surprised you first of all in this country and what was your first impression of it?
There's tourist Italy and there's domestic Italy, where you have to live and put up with the laws. I felt like an immigrant that nobody wanted. Not only was it a foreign country to me, but I didn't speak Italian, and Italians are very respectful of their language and history.
And to culture.
Yes, to your culture. And at the same time, I am Ukrainian, from a country that not everyone knows, or at least did not know there, and besides, I study for free in their country at the expense of the state. Difficult situation.
And they treated you like a dependent.
Not everyone was so prejudiced against me, but in general, yes, it was very difficult, plus a bunch of bureaucratic aspects. If you're a modern young Italian, you won't stay in this country for long because the system is so entrenched and outdated that it's impossible to get anywhere or accomplish anything there.
So, you started at design school. Tell us briefly about the first 6 months, just a few sentences. What amazed you and what were the difficulties in the first 6 months of your studies?
I had a huge problem with the language because I didn't count on my victory, on my winnings, and so I flew to Italy without knowing the language.
You weren't ready.
I was totally unprepared because I ignored learning English both at school and at the institute in Kiev, because I never seriously considered the possibility and necessity of going abroad. And when this jackpot fell into my hands, I immediately signed up for some language courses. Of course, it was not enough for me, because I had only a month before I left. Then began the most embarrassing moments of my life, when you stand in front of Pininfarina, Fiat, or Alfa Romeo designers and can't formulate 3 words to explain and defend your project. Yes. Your classmates and the headmaster are standing next to you, and you could only remember 3 words, and you realize that you miscalculated a little bit. So in addition to learning to draw, I was also learning the language. It was very difficult. Because I needed to maintain a certain grade, and one could easily lose that scholarship and actually lose that chance.
But it's usually people with unshakable willpower who go there. I know that you had quite an interesting life story before Italy. You ended up in Moscow. Tell me a little about it.
Yes, my willpower was strengthened considerably in that place. I got to Moscow when I went there for an intensive refresher course in industrial design. Subsequently, I was spotted by one of the art directors at Lebedev Studio, a well-known designer in Russia and, in fact, outside of it too. They invited me for a 2-month internship. It was the first of the jackpots when I was lucky. In general, it all happened within 1 year. It was the 2008 year, in the span of 2 or 3 months.
You are lucky.
Yes, I was lucky that year. I'll have to see where the planets and stars stood then.
What about subsequent years?
It was already the result of what happened that year.
Guys, he's a bit of a cheat. He's lucky. Even today, he's lucky that I'm free and can interview him.
How immodest.
I agree. Tell me, who is Lebedev? Tell me literally in 2 words. He's the best and highest paid designer in Russia, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think he's a very apathetic personality and at one time was a monopolist of the design field. And deservedly so, given all his controversial reputation, as only he was called, and odious, and scandalous. Nevertheless, he is 100% competent in his industry, and he made such a coverage from graphic to industrial design, that is, he covered everything that we still do not have in Ukraine.
What does from graphic to industrial design mean?
It's everything from logo design to, I don't know, a crane cab or a microwave.
I see, so they'll take any job.
Yes.
Is it a large organization?
It is a huge collective. I don't know exactly, but they have offices in the United States as well, a team in Kiev, at least it used to be. Probably against the background of all the events in Ukraine, they closed down, but there were about 200 or 300 people in the Moscow office alone.
In the Moscow office.
Imagine this, you are in the center of Moscow, the employees have to pay salaries, you have to pay a huge rent for the building.
No, guys, Max is not telling us the whole story. We've discussed this before. The center of Moscow is the Moscow Ring, right? This is considered the center of Moscow, and there is a supercenter of Moscow, which is Red Square.
Right.
It's an office with access to Red Square.
Yes, close by, you had to walk 10 minutes there and Red Square was around the corner. So I had culture shock for those 2 months. By the way, getting back to the topic of willpower, this was my first serious test, primarily mental, when I was tested for endurance. And I think the very first day I arrived, I was about to leave.
Why?
Because the studio had a principled position to speak exclusively in English, as there were foreign trainees present.
You got into this group where English was spoken. You realized that you probably couldn't go your way, because your knowledge of English at that time was very weak, not like it is now.
I had to learn the language on the go, improve my knowledge. In 2 months you can learn a lot if you want. Yes.
If there's no choice. And what happened there? Because the company you worked for at Lebedev's, namely the design atelier, is that what it's called?
Design studio.
The best design studio in Russia. It is famous not so much for its unconventional approach, but for its specific working conditions and approach to these conditions, right? In other words, there were some very talented people working there, but like all artists, they had their oddities, right?
Yes, I saw a lot there.
Please tell us a little bit, because we've already talked about this job as a pretty difficult experience in your life.
Yes, I remember one of the episodes. It was on the studio's anniversary, its 17th anniversary. You have to understand that Lebedev is as down-to-earth as possible, but at the same time inaccessible because of his busy schedule. And he made one of the events of that evening an auction, where one of the lots was the following: if you won this lot, you could send Artemy Lebedev himself to McDonald's to buy you a Happy Meal.
Okay, naked or clothed?
It didn't matter whether he was actually naked or clothed. The very fact that he would agree to go buy you a Happy Meal from McDonald's on Red Square was incredible. However, it had to be well paid for. I remember that one girl paid $300 for it.
$300?
Exactly.
She was fired the next day.
No.
After 2 days?
Look, this is a man with such a reputation that it wasn't humiliating for him, but you also have to give credit to that girl. It was a very brave, very daring act, and they both realized it. No one insulted anyone, and no one was humiliated.
I'll tell you, as a manager, I've been managing people for over 20 years. This is a fairly common situation. Both sides benefit from this maneuver. The girl who bought this item wins, but above all, the manager who supposedly humiliated himself wins, but, in fact, in the eyes of others, and in your eyes as well, he earned much more respect. However, if he had gone naked to buy this Happy Meal, it would have been a different story. And we're changing locations now, going back to Italy, moving on. Max, our conversation stopped at Italy. You went to Italy, you had already started your studies there. I realized that it was a rather bureaucratic country. I realized that your knowledge of the language was zero, but you started to learn, you started to communicate somehow. Did you quickly get up to speed and understand what they want from you, what you need in this life? Because this is Europe, this is not Ukraine, and there are completely different requirements there, a completely different approach, a completely different life.
There is a concept in English that sounds like culture clash, that is cultural conflict. No matter how close we are to Europe in Ukraine, we will always have a cultural conflict. We grew up on different movies, cartoons, shows, and so on. We have different sports idols. Therefore, it was impossible for people from countries like ours, we are talking about countries from the former USSR, to fit in, to assimilate into that environment. It is very difficult to be your own in Europe, especially when you are a moderately modest student and not yet brave enough.
How old were you?
22 years.
Cool.
It was my first plane. It was my first interaction with foreigners. It was my first presentations, my first introductions.
First sex.
The first sex was earlier.
2 days earlier. We move on.
On the plane. So, I can't say that in 2 years I somehow fit in there, and I didn't really have such a goal. I wanted to get an education and find a job, and I had no intention of leaving. To be more precise, I had no goal to fly out of Italy and find a job somewhere else. After all, Italy is the center of the European car industry. So Italy aroused a certain appetite and interest in me. However, all this bureaucracy very quickly extinguished this enthusiasm. I felt like an immigrant in every way and realized that I had to leave.
How long did it take you to figure it out?
I realized this after about a year and a half. It was just difficult at the time. Then I heard that in the world brands, in the companies where I dreamed of working, the salary started and probably ended around 1,500, 2,000 for a young designer.
So the dream has turned into a not-so-promising reality?
Let's put it this way, automobile design is not about money at all, meaning you will never become a millionaire in this field in principle.
Since you brought up this topic yourself, let's talk about money, because the viewers on our channel are very fond of such topics, and underpants and money are somewhere close to each other. How much do you earn at McLaren?
Look, it's such a delicate question. I make about 5 grand.
5,000 what?
Pounds.
5,000 pounds, that's about 7,200, a little more than $7,000. Does the company pay anything extra for you?
No, the company doesn't pay anything. You decide where you live and what kind of car you drive. In a commune or a 2-bedroom apartment? It's up to you to spend a percentage of your salary on improvements.
I was preparing for our conversation. Question 10 of my acquaintances bragged to everyone that I will shoot Max this as a Ukrainian star, a man who works in the company McLaren. What do you think his salary is? 10 people out of 10 said above $15,000, one said $15,000, and the rest said $20,000.
I have room to grow.
Yes, there's room to grow, after all, 7,000. Is it expensive to live in England?
Yes, it's expensive to live in England, but I'll be honest, Sergey, I didn't go there to earn a yacht or even a McLaren. Most likely, ironically, being a McLaren designer, I won't be able to afford to drive my own McLaren if I continue to work there. So my long-held dream of giving my father a car, which I will design, has not yet come true. Nevertheless, I get great pleasure from what I do. That is, I do not aspire to earn as much money as possible. I have no desire to earn and save, that is, to build up my capital, so I am not complaining. It's clear that as you get older, requests change a little bit, some specific preferences change as well, but look, 5,000 when I started, and I started 6 years ago, that was good.
It's still a decent paycheck. Let's keep going. We changed the subject a little bit. After you finished school in Italy, in Turin, what did you do then?
My path. When I graduated from Turin. Towards the end of my sophomore year, in the middle of my sophomore year in Italy, I am invited to do an internship at Mercedes in Germany. It was a huge compliment because you're still a student and you don't feel your worth or your potential. In the eyes of the manufacturers. And I was invited to work at Škoda. So I had 2 main offers that I was seriously considering, because everything else had to do with Chinese things or local internships in Italy, all things that I had long ago excluded from my radar. So between Mercedes and Škoda, between an internship and a job, I chose to work at Škoda for 2 reasons. The first one is stability. And that implied a different paycheck and a long-term contract. Secondly, the Škoda brand was just on the lookout for something new when they created the next generation of cars under the direction of Joseph Kabin, who was the exterior designer of the Bugatti Veyron. And then, after the success of the Veyron, he was appointed design director at Škoda, and he was going to make a revolution. I think he succeeded, and I was involved from the beginning, so it was an obvious choice for me.
Max had a choice between Mercedes and Škoda. Mercedes offered him an internship, am I right?
Yes.
Škoda offered you the conditions of a full-fledged employee right away, so you choose Škoda. It was absolutely the right choice, a shot straight to the point, especially as Volkswagen has more money. How long did you work there?
For 3 years I was an exterior designer.
And this man who created the Bugatti Veyron, did he specifically consider you and did he specifically invite you?
Yes, he was my boss. He invited me and interviewed me. I flew from Italy to the Czech Republic for literally 3 days. It was my first visit to Prague. When I went to his office, I saw that in front of him there was my portfolio in printed form, which I had sent him in PDF format. That is, he had printed it out and read it himself. And then we talked for an hour and a half, not about my work, but about my qualities, some human preferences in art, about my family, my sister, my cat, and so on. That is, subsequently, as I realized, he needed to understand what kind of person I was and whether I would become part of their collective, because those who like to act on their own are not welcome anywhere. If you only think about personal success, you'll never fit in.
Guys, I want to summarize this block of questions. I want to touch Max because I'm going to go buy a lottery ticket tomorrow. And this is the luckiest person I've ever met in my life. Now I'm going to explain why. He goes to Russia for an internship with the best designer, and after that he wins the best grant to study at a car design school in Turin in Italy. Then the man who drew and designed, roughly speaking, the Bugatti Veyron, invites him into his private office and says, "I want you to work for me," and now he works for McLaren and will be eating probably the best kebab of today.
Let's drink to that. You introduced me in such a way that I thought, who is this person?
Let's continue our conversation. You started working at Škoda. How long did it last?
I worked for 3 years as an exterior designer, and at some point I just exhausted myself creatively. I had a creative crisis. I want to remind you that my reputational capital in design is my ability to generate ideas. In other words, it's imagination. It's the ability to draw some non-standard, interesting, relevant, trendy solutions. And so, after 2.5 years, I realized that I was drawing the same things. The concept of muscle memory, when your hand is guided to the same line, the same shape, that's a pretty specific topic for you, but try to imagine such a process.
I actually understand you so much, because my daughter is almost 3 and I'm constantly drawing her either a hedgehog or a...
That's right, let's just say I sketched hedgehogs, sketched so much that I couldn't draw anything else. I realized that I had to make a critical change immediately.
Yes, more than that, I think with Volkswagen, particularly in the Škoda division that you worked in, they have quite a strong corporate identity. All the cars are similar to each other and there are almost no differences between the models. In my opinion, it's so typical mass market. So you worked there for 3 years. How did you get to McLaren?
With McLaren, it was like a dream.
Just a second. You can keep going.
I want to say that all designers, in any design industry, have their own communities. There are blogs where guys exchange their portfolios and so on. These are some business cards. The guys from McLaren came across one of these business cards and basically called me, which is not difficult to do, find a personal contact of a person. So they invited me for an interview. You missed the moment, or I missed the moment, when I was invited to Land Rover. By then I had already started looking for a job and I was invited to Land Rover. I was very happy because it meant 2 things. Finally, I would be living and working in a country where I could speak the same language. It was English, which by then I had already learned. And it was completely different money, it was a new culture, something I had been missing. And, of course, I agreed to this proposal. In principle, I liked the brand, I liked the conditions, but then McLaren appeared on the horizon and they offered much less money. The conditions were not so favorable. But I swear to you, when I got to the McLaren Technology Center, I felt like I was going to space and I was on a spaceship. This building was built by Norman Foster, and being an architect, you probably know him.
I'm an architect who has only been in school for a month and a half my freshman year.
It doesn't matter, you must know Norman Foster. He's the man who built this legendary London skyscraper gherkin that looks like a cigar or an egg.
Yes, this is a cool building, we will show it now.
Oh, and be sure to show the McLaren Technology Center because it was designed by the same person. You walk in there like you're on a spaceship, white walls, high ceilings, everything in glass, airplanes, helicopters.
House for the crazy.
A house that makes you crazy.
Cool.
Employee gym, swimming pool, what else? An alley of legendary McLaren 1. I mean, the whole thing made such an impression on me and had such a mesmerizing effect that as soon as I crossed the threshold, I knew that no matter what offer they made me, even if I was sweeping floors, I was ready to stay there.
Your answer would be yes.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Yes.
They offered you certain terms and you started working and have been with the company for 6 years.
By now, yes.
To date, 6 years. It's your 20th year. Let's talk about your accomplishments. What cars, what projects have you created?
Starting from the first sketch, the car is designed on average for about 3 years.
I meant to say 2.
2.5 years, sometimes longer. So let's say 3 years from the first drawing to the first prototype. Accordingly, there were few such cycles in 6 years, as you can imagine. I am the creator of the McLaren 600 LT exterior design and the Senna interior design. This was my first project. By the way, it was a big challenge for me because I was hired as an exterior designer and my first assignment was interior. And I was a little.
The interior, and what a car.
Because of that, I was a little bit tense, because I had a probation period of 3 months and I had to show the maximum level. The maximum level in interior design, which I had no experience in. Here again I had to do the impossible, of course, not without the help of my colleagues in management, that is, I was not left only to myself. Much to my delight and surprise, my final design was chosen. There are 4 designers who draw the same theme, and after 3 months, you have to choose one of them. Each month we went through a filtering process, meaning that out of the 4, 3 remain, then 2, and finally 1. I went through the whole cycle of this filtering, after which my design was chosen.
How many people were there?
There were 4 of us, like I said.
Guys, I'll summarize. Max gets to work at McLaren, walks into a white office, white walls, ceilings, a house for crazy people. Everything is incredibly cool. He immediately agrees to work there, despite the conditions. And he's given the task of drawing a car. Think about it, that's worth £1 million. This car.
Stock car.
How many of these stock cars were produced?
500.
500 cars. This is the McLaren Senna. It's a hypercar, not to be confused with a supercar. It's an exclusive limited edition hypercar, and Max, being a rookie, from the get-go, draws the interior of this car. His design passes all facets of filtering, and out of 4 competitors, out of 3 competitors he is the one who makes it to the finals. You draw this car, it gets approved, some adjustments are made, and let's say you are the progenitor of the interior of this hypercar.
It sounds immodest, it sounds loud.
Sorry, but McLaren is immodest in itself. It's certainly not a Škoda.
Yeah, it's not a Škoda.
Moving on, what's your next job?
My next job, just so I'm a little bit out of chronological order, it was the exterior of the McLaren 600 LT. After the McLaren 600 LT there was a mini project 720 GT3.
McLaren 720 GT3. We're about to find pictures of it and we'll be sure to put it in our video. It's exactly the circular sports limited edition version, isn't it?
Yes, but it's not really a limited edition, meaning if you want to race for a team, if you have your own team and you want to race, you can buy this sports car if you have a team.
If there is a team.
This is not a limited edition car.
You've got 3 of these big projects, 3 big jobs in 6 years.
Yes. Yes.
You and I were discussing the McLaren design. Why does the McLaren look the way it does?
Look, there is such a thing as DNA. McLaren is a relatively new brand that doesn't have a long history behind it.
How old is McLaren?
If you start with racing tradition, from the days of Bruce McLaren, who put together his first car, won a race in it and became a famous car designer, that's a little over 50 years. If we're talking about McLaren cars for public roads, barring the legendary F1, which was a one-off, the brand is now about 15 years old.
Guys, the McLaren brand is about 55 years old. Originally it was a racing team that didn't make cars. After that they produced the McLaren F1 hypercar. Now such a car already used costs about $20 million. They were produced about 500 pieces.
No.
Or less?
There were 106 cars in all.
There were 106 cars, at least half of them were smashed. By the way, Jay Leno, a famous American car collector, has such a car, and it is worth $20 million. I'll explain why the price is so high. The speed record of this car, I think about 380 km per hour, could not be broken for 20 or 30 years, in principle, until the well-known Bugatti Veyron, Koenigsegg Jesko Absolute and everything else came out. But they started mass production of cars about 10 years ago. 15 years. What's their first model?
12Cs.
12C, is that the one we filmed?
Yes.
This is the exact car we captured on video, but we'll talk about it later. I suggest we get back to the subject of DNA and McLaren, which has been making cars for the last 15 years.
Accordingly, to answer your question, my point is that the company doesn't have a rich history to go back to and dig up interesting original elements from there. So on the one hand there is a huge advantage for the company to create something new without being tied to the past. On the other hand there is a difficulty in creating something recognizable so that there is some relation to history. Therefore, the company's design director decided to draw inspiration from the marine world. And if we look at the models starting with the McLaren P1, you can very clearly see the silhouettes and the hammerfish image in the front of the car, those eyes.
Now we will insert a picture for you to see clearly.
This predatory squint, this aggressive look at his unmistakably recognizable hammerfish, and, accordingly, it became the start of a new language of forms, on which all subsequent car models were built up.
I suggest we redeploy now. I've come in a supercar on purpose. You're developing supercars, and I brought one for you. I want you to express your opinion, what you think of my supercar. We do not want to humiliate this car or, on the contrary, praise it in any way. I just want you to talk about the design of the supercar, about the reasons for certain decisions.
Let's give it a shot. Look, there's an ethical element here. As a working designer, I don't want to berate or flatter my colleagues.
I'm not going to let my car be humiliated, because this is my personal car. And we're going to him. Guys, we're already standing in front of my supercar. This is a first-generation, 10th-year Audi R8, a 10-cylinder car. But we're not going to talk about the engine, we're going to talk about the design of this car. Max, I think you are the designer of the awesome McLaren. What do you think of my R8?
Look, let me start by describing the general features of the car. The car is very clean, concise. The first thing that catches your eye is the absence of visual tinsel, the noise that is outdated, that pulls the car into the past.
Is the noise some additional elements?
Noise are things that tend to become obsolete after 2 or 3 years, so these are elements that were everywhere a couple of years ago. One way or another, the automotive industry tends to repeat similar solutions. For this reason, looking at this car, you realize that it is the most difficult to become obsolete compared to other R8s, because I now look and see that the first generation is fresher and cleaner than the second. When the first generation came out, it was a revolution. When the second generation came out, it was an improvement, building something on the first, respectively, evolution, that is, there is no such gap, no resonance, and, in fact, it's hard to pick on it.
By the way, Max seriously criticized my wheels. Guys, I have expensive wheels from Lamborghini Huracan, quite fresh. They are not from this model and not even from this generation. He didn't like it very much, but you can't argue about tastes. My choice. I like it very much, it looks very cool. So you think that this car is not as ultimatum as other supercars, and basically it was meant to be such an everyday car.
I think it is the optimal option for Ukrainian roads, selfie, 2-seater and compact sports car.
Supercar.
Supercar.
Don't say, supercar.
It is an insult?
This is a purebred supercar.
I fix, purebred supercar.
Guys, a supercar is a car that is built either on a space frame, like this car here, or on a monocoque, like the McLaren models are made. That is, the engine is mostly inside the base, that is, behind the driver and passenger seat, and only such a car can be a pure supercar. The Porsche 911 is not a supercar, it's a sports car. It's built on a body-on-frame basis. Moving on. Are there any points of interest here that you liked or, on the contrary, annoyed you?
The hood is very beautifully executed, because there are no connector lines in the classic sense, which usually run somewhere in this area, or, as in the Audi TT, they run along this rib. One-piece hood shape. First of all, it's expensive to manufacture and expensive in consumption, more specifically in replacement, because you're replacing the whole entire hood. If you bang a fender somewhere, you have to replace a huge component. Moving on along the side of the car, this is the part one don't quite understand, the so-called blade on the Audi R8, because it seems like this one is an air intake, but it's a fake. Here stands the plug, despite being a beautiful carbon fiber one, authentic and expensive, as I understand Sergio will confirm.
Yes.
This blade looks really cool in the side view because the graphics fit and wrap nicely into the window line and into the glass. That's what the second generation is missing. I think they took that blade out.
Yes.
And this piece of carbon fiber is gone, too. It's lost its charisma, lost its charm. I'm not flattering Sergio. There's some amateurishness here in the form of these horrible wheels. But this one deserves a like.
Yeah, by the way, about these plugs, you said McLaren would never have allowed that.
McLaren will never allow such a thing because all forms must be functional and all fake elements are not in our DNA, meaning such things must be functional.
The McLaren brand would never do that?
Never. We'd be pelted with tomatoes.
What do you think of the rear of the car?
The rear of the car catches the eye, of course, already slightly outdated optics, interior optics, because this is what speaks to the modernity of the car. The horizontal motif is very well done, i.e. a lot of horizontal lines. Because visually our brain reads the width of the car and adds more, pardon the tautology, additional width. I mean, the car looks very lean, it has a very cool stance, it looks stable, strong and balanced. That is, due to these horizontal lines, we see that the body color ends flush with the taillights, respectively. It allows us to see the full power and width of the car.
So the designers were trying to visually expand the car?
Yes, they wanted to make the car visually wider.
Although the car is wide as it is.
Yes, all designers have a set of some sort of visual tricks that make a long car look shorter, or a narrow car look wider, and so on.
In other words, this car is normal, right?
Anyway, it's like you said, it's the German car industry. I say yes because of the clean design with no unnecessary tinsel.
By the way guys, I'm looking to switch this car next year, and I'm choosing between two options, two used supercars. One option is a Lamborghini Huracan and the other option is a 650 McLaren, both approximately 2017 years old. And you can tell us in the comments which one you like better. You will see these two cars on your screen. Write your comments. Guys, we have a blitz poll, just a few questions because the food is on the table. Everybody's already waiting for us, we're really hungry. We've been shooting this video for a few hours now, let's get started. Are you a career man?
Absolutely, yes. I don't like to stand still.
Moving on. Have you lost many friends since your success?
I think I've made more friends, actually, than I've lost, to make a long story short. But success is a stretch and I'm still on the road. I think there will be more to come.
I agree, by the way, cool expression, more to come, I really like it. Are you lucky in life? 100%, at least, I was lucky in my life. You know, this will not be short, but my main luck is perseverance. This is what I wish the Ukrainians at the end. Fine. What do Ukrainians lack?
Guys, make sure you learn a foreign language. I beg you, I beg you. I say this from my own bitter experience. It is very important to know a foreign language and, of course, perseverance is very important, because in my short 10 years of professional career, I have seen a lot of guys. There are a lot of talented kids and very few persistent ones, and very often talent is offset by an inability to insist.
Okay, people from England or Italy?
Residents of England.
Residents of England or Ukraine?
Ukrainians.
I agree. Now tell our viewers a wish from yourself. You've already said part of your wish, and I support Max in this 100%. Guys, learn the language. What do you advise people who are sitting and dreaming of going abroad, for whom you are just now an icon? We discovered you as the pride of Ukraine, as a person who has reached, in our opinion, great heights, because you work in an incredibly cool company. I had heard a lot about you before I met you, and it was a pleasure to spend the day with you. Have some advice for ordinary guys who are studying now and thinking about what will happen to them next.
Guys, don't be afraid to dream, indulge your ambitions. As they say, if your dreams don't scare you, then they're not big enough. The power of dreams is that they come true. These are the words that gave me strength until I became an automobile designer.
So you read my Instagram post from yesterday, where I wrote, I'll show it to you now. And we'll say goodbye and go eat some unbelievably delicious meat and finish our warm beer. Bye, Sergio, we'll see you again.